Time to check in with Chris Dimakos. He's our CJAD 800 legal contributor. And Chris, I want to deal with this. So in the wake of the murder of Charlie Kirk, someone decides to post something. And by the way, I don't mean this in theory, theoretically, right? People have actually done this, celebrating a political figure's murder. People have done this, cheered it on. But they do it on their own personal social media account. Somehow it's found out by someone, by their employer perhaps. And when that happens, that employer proceeds to either fire or suspend that person because of it. Even though, and I'll stipulate this again, they posted that comment, inappropriate as it may have been, on their own personal website or social media site. Not on the company's, doesn't talk about the company, just as an individual. We're starting to see this happen. Can that actually be done?
Right, and so it's a very important question. And before I answer that in detail, you have to make the distinction between your right to free speech, which is guaranteed. If we take that scenario here in Canada, you have the right to unhindered free speech, and that is protected by our Constitution. But that's a different set of rules and regulations when you take off your citizen hat and you put on your employee hat. Once you step into that employer-employee realm, it's now governed by employment contracts, and it's governed by obligations of loyalty to your employer. So the first thing you have to look at is, well, when I'm making these expressions, when I'm posting, when I'm voicing my opinion, am I doing that? And is my employer implicated in any way? Because if they are, well, then you have a situation where the employer can say, 1 second now, you're getting me involved here. I want to be neutral. I don't want to have our company be tagged or associated with anything that you're saying on this front. It's something that we want to refrain from. Like we see it all the time. We see people who are contributing to I saw a columnist or a contributor get fired, let go by, I think it was MSNBC. This morning, I read that one of the founders of Ben & Jerry's, which got sold, but basically said I have to leave because I'm an employee and I feel like I can't express myself. I want to express myself on some of the views, and the company says no, you can't. We want to remain neutral. So to answer your question, Aaron, the first thing you have to ask yourself is, am I doing this on my own private account that is in no way, shape, or form tied to, cannot be traced back to, have any affiliation to my employer? If that's the case, well, then you have a very good chance that your free speech is your free speech and you won't suffer any consequences. But if your employer, for some reason or somehow, feels like what you're doing affects their reputation, their brand, their corporate culture, even when it comes to the relationships within the company, sometimes they're saying, hey, we don't want to have this discourse in our offices. We don't want to have people expressing themselves politically to the point where there's arguments, there's fights, and there's things that happen in the office that we don't want, conduct we don't want. So again, to answer your question, you have the right to have your speech, and that's guaranteed by the Constitution, as long as it's done when you're wearing your citizen hat. The minute you step into that employee-employer arena, then there's limitations to what you can say, and the company has a right to remain neutral and to protect its brand. And they can either discipline you, terminate you, depending on how severe it is, and take any measure they need to protect their brand.
So, okay, it gets interesting at that point, Chris, because what happens is, say you post this from your personal account. It's not related to your work. You don't do it from your work, right? This is you speaking as a person. And as you just said, you have that right to free speech. But then someone, because we're seeing something now called doxing, right, where they're being, these people, who were, I guess, supporters of Charlie Kirk, are asked now to go ahead and basically call out people, point them out who have said things. So maybe at that point, someone says, hey, I know this guy. He works at so-and-so. And even though you posted that on your personal page, you get found out. Someone draws that association. Your employer finds out. Then what? Then is your right as a person, even though you posted it on your own account, is that gone now because someone found out where you work?
You're absolutely right about it. So the key there, first of all, there is no law that addresses every particular situation. What we have is a rules of guidelines, and we have a set of laws and precedents. We take the facts, and then lawyers argue which set of facts should fall under which guidelines and which rule of law. So in this case, you probably have a citizen that says, hey, this was a private account. Nowhere does it indicate that I'm an employee of this company. no one, apart from somebody who has personal knowledge of it, there's no harm to the company's reputation, the company's brand. I cannot be connected to the company based on this post. And then if you're the lawyer for the employer, you're saying, well, how do we find out? We obviously found out because guess what? Your posts are not that private. There are people who know that you work for a company, and the fact that you made those posts, knowing that it was a risk that you took, well, you're going to have to be disciplined because of that. And how severe that disciplinary action is will obviously get reviewed, and they've been overturned. Sometimes they've been confirmed. It's all based on how severe and what's reasonable disciplinary action in these types of things. And again, I not to say that we are basically we have no free speech at all, but you have to always remember that when it comes to your company, the company pays you a salary. They have the right to be able to protect themselves from these types of things. So, and I know it goes against fundamental principles we have, but you always have to remember that when you are getting a salary from a company, there are rules and regulations that you have to follow to get that salary. And this, unfortunately, is one of those things where you have to loyal to the company, and you cannot jeopardize their interests. So to answer your question, it would be a case-by-case basis. That one would seem to me to be very difficult for the employer to prove harm to the reputation, because attaching it to that post would be very difficult. So I would lean towards the person that made the post not suffering any consequences, but it's not a guarantee. Again, you have to really distance yourself and not allow any type of facts or circumstances to connect yourself to the company.
Just one last thing, and I don't want to run out of time, but let's say, would it matter what your position within that company was? Obviously, if you're an executive, or someone, at the higher end of the scale, it's one thing. If you're, just an administrator with, like one of 1,000 people in there and you posted something, would that make a difference?
Right. And again, your natural legal instincts come into play. Great question. You're absolutely right. The higher up you are in the company, the position that you're occupying, the more responsibility you have within the company, the more you get scrutinized, and the more your obligation to loyalty is increased. So if you are somebody who works in the warehouse, who nobody knows of, is anonymous, you would have less scrutiny in terms of what you post versus, let's say, the CEO of the company or the CFO of the company. The higher you climb that chain, the more intense the obligation is to remain loyal and remain neutral for the company.
And I think it would be fair to say, obviously, some of these cases, and we've seen this happen in the U.S. already, some of these will end up in court, right?
They will absolutely end up in court. We see them all the time. But what we're seeing now, leaning, is the companies are having more and more discretion to crack down on what they say is partial posts, and whether it's political, whether it's religious, or whatever the case may be. More and more companies are stressing the fact that, hey, we just want to be neutral. Okay. Don't involve us in any of this stuff. We just want to make make sales, make profits, and we don't want to be involved in any of this stuff. So we're seeing more and more companies are having more power when it comes to that.
We will leave it at that. Chris, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Aaron.